Thank you, Dave, for being on the program.
Hi, glad to be here.
Are you able to ship human remains at this time?
Yes, domestically, we are not inhibited at all. And so the shipments, they go on as they have in the past, barring, local ordinances and so forth that, might have a curve or two in there for us. Internationally, we have been curtailed to this point 90% or so compared to what we did have in the past.
And that is because of the embargo, the limitation of the flights?
Yeah, the embargo's been a big deal. Many countries, we don't have access to, and when our government releases that capacity will come back. But for now, we're doing the best we can. We are still able to get into Mexico and a couple other countries, but the capacity has been shut down dramatically over the last number of days.
If the family decides to wait, can you please tell me what is involved in that process? Walk me through step by step in that process, please.
Sure. From the time that the funeral home has been called that there's a death has occurred, a member of the staff from the funeral home will go pick up the loved one wherever they might be. And many times it's at a hospital, and then sometimes it's at home. Sometimes it's a nursing home, and the body will be transported to the funeral home. And then after the body arrives there, the embalming process will be completed. And after that, if there is a flight available, we would tender the loved one to the airport to be transported back to the country where the ceremony is going to take place.
And in terms of documentation, is there any documentation that the family has to provide? What is the role of the family in this entire process?
Right, that's a really good question. The first thing that needs to be done is to call the funeral home, because the funeral home, they have the local ordinances. In many cases, the local county has say over what happens with the human remains. So first thing you need to do is contact a funeral home that has a relationship with the Board of Health. The Board of Health will secure the proper local document, the death certificate, based on state requirements, so the transportation can take place. The family would also want to make sure that they've secured the loved one's passport and any other identification. Very important in doing this, because the consulate will ask for it. And the consulates, there's quite a few of them around the United States. They're near large metropolitan areas. And then the funeral home would be contacting the consulate that is closest to where the person would die.
And the permission from the consulate is secured by the funeral home. The family is not supposed to do anything. Is that correct?
Right. The family is certainly welcome to call the consulate. That they're there to serve the citizenry of the United States, and they're welcome to call there. It's just many funeral homes have relationships and have experience with the consulates. And so that's why it's a good idea to let the funeral home handle it. And that's why you hire a funeral director, to make sure that they take care of the details that you have an experience level of one with. So it's a good idea to get a reputable funeral director involved.
And that is all it is involved in terms of paperwork. And then it's just the waiting time for the remains for the loved one to be transported. Is that right?
That's right. And you never would want to set a service time until the loved one is transported back to the country where the ceremony is going to take place. Some people try, get a little ahead of themselves and make sure that that you don't set a service time until the loved one arrives in the country or in the locality of where the ceremony will be.
Now, while waiting, let's talk about both sides of the family. The family that is here in the United States, can they still visit the deceased, have visitation at the funeral home and visit the deceased? Is it safe?
Yes, and another very good question. And is it safe in relation to COVID-19? Yes, it is.
Yes.
The CDC, the Center for Disease Control here in the United States, says that there's no inherent risk for anybody being around the area of deceased human. If the person is properly embalmed and properly sanitized, there is no risk whatsoever. But out of abundance of caution to anybody that would be a family member or a visitor to a visitation to not touch the body or kiss the body.
Okay.
It probably would still be okay, but we would just advise against the touching or the kissing of the body.
And now, how about the family, the receiving family in the country of origin? Can they have an open casket ceremony? Is it
Oh,
safe?
yeah, absolutely. Here in the United States, we're still having open casket services. However, the social distancing requirements still are in play. So in the funeral home, in our state, it's 10 people in the funeral home, but you also have to keep in mind of the 6-foot spacing that's required. So as long as those things are observed, there's no reason you can't have an open casket viewing and funeral.
What is the cost of this process? And I know that there are differences and prices and all in your industry, but a ballpark number so a family can be prepared that I'm looking at this amount of money.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for prefacing your question. The cost will vary, as you mentioned. A flight portion, depending upon where you're going. If you're going to go to Europe, it would be anywhere from $1,500 to $2,500. Could be more, could be less, depending upon the capacity of the aircraft. And then the preparation and the embalming for here in the United States prior to departure, that would be between $1,500 and $2,000. So you're looking at a round number of $4,000, but it could be more, and it also could be less.
Yes.
I don't like to be held to a number. You ask it, and you need to provide good information to the people you're representing. So I wanted to at least give you a starting point. I don't want people to think it's $25,000 or $50,000.
Exactly.
So,
We wanted to know.
Right. Those are scary numbers. I don't think these numbers for somebody that contemplates an international transfer are outlined.
How long does this whole process take? And if you could give us a comparison on a normal situation
Sure.
and in the pandemic situation, just to have a sense of time.
Yeah. In a normal situation, the death certificate can take up to a week, depending upon where you are. And during that time, concurrently, the funeral director would be working with the consulate as well. I would say inside of 10 days, when you don't have a worldwide pandemic going on. But since we do, it's going to take a little longer than that. It might take double the time. But there has to be capacity for the airlines, and then the funeral director in the area that the person died needs to have capacity as well. There's been some of our colleagues in New Jersey and New York that have had many, many people die, and their funeral homes are very, very busy, and they may not be able to respond as quickly. Be patient and be prepared to be a few weeks. But I can't. It's so difficult to answer that question. These are such round numbers because every market's going to be different because they have different circumstances going on. There could be some places where it takes place very quickly. It could be a situation where it could take a month.
It's a fact that we have at around 11 million undocumented immigrants here in the United States. Is the process of transportation, human remains transportation, the same for this category of immigrants?
Yes, it would be. There would need to be identification, and sometimes identification with somebody that's not documented is difficult. But sometimes there's an employee card, sometimes there's a credit card. Any kind of information that would lead somebody to have an identification is going to be helpful when working with the consulate. The consulate's interest is to get the person back home for a ceremony.
The undocumented label kind of make people fear coming out and saying that or claiming the body of a person in this situation.
Yes.
Have you noticed that kind of fear or hesitation of families to claim the bodies of undocumented immigrants?
Well, in my experience with serving families, and we know a number of them have been undocumented, we serve everybody. There is nobody my family would ever turn away from serving. I've been in the funeral service for 34 years. I read all the industry publications. I never recalled a story that involved that where somebody would feel threatened about going to a funeral. I don't think our public would stand for it, frankly. I think our American people are pretty compassionate.
What if an American citizen dies abroad? Is the process the same? Are the same, is the same process? Are the same organizations involved?
Yes, they are. Consulates would be involved. If there happens to be an embassy in the country where the person dies, that person would be contacted from the embassy. The United States has embassies in many countries around the world, and that certainly would be an entity that would be involved in the transfer. Once again, you would want to call a funeral director that's close to where the death took place, and then that funeral director would call the embassy and speak to an official there that would be representing the United States. They could help with any red tape involved, and the transfer would be made. I believe the cost would be similar. I haven't checked the exact, but I believe the cost would be very similar when you have an international transfer.
How about a tourist that is visiting the United States and dies here?
Right. Well,
Does it say?
Sure, it's the same thing.
Something?
A member of the funeral home staff would contact the embassy, because most of the countries have embassies here in the United States, and we would
Yes.
contact them. And if they felt it was necessary to talk to a family to give them comfort, there could be a conversation with family members and them, but the funeral director, they can handle those arrangements very, very easily. And in the metropolitan areas, the funeral homes are very experienced with this.
What if someone says, no, I would like to do everything on my own privately? Is that possible at all?
But for a transfer,
Yes.
international transfer, I would advise against it. It would be very difficult. They probably could get it done, but relationships at that point are very important, and the funeral homes have relationships and have experience with working with consulates, so forth. And there've been some people that have even tried to personally transfer the body from where the person died to someplace. That's never a good idea, because in many counties there's regulations about transporting deceased humans. It's not that it can't be done, it can't be tried. I would just advise against it.
Okay. And now, to summarize the whole thing, not just for the immigrant families, but in general, what is the status of your industry right now? Are you overwhelmed? What is the main challenge?
Yes, our industry right now, it has changed because of the social distancing, and a funeral is a social event, but you can still have a visitation. You can still do an online signing of a guest book. You can still send flowers. You can still participate and acknowledge the death, which is very important to the family.
Thank you, Dave, for all the information. I know that many immigrant families would appreciate your thoughts at this point.
Oh, you're quite welcome.
And
Pleasure talking with you.
Likewise. And lastly, I wanted to thank not only you, but all members of your industry for your work at this tough situation.
Well, thank you. I don't know if you saw, but today Mark Cuban thanked all the people in funeral service today, which I thought was pretty wonderful.
That I missed.
Yeah.
That I missed.
It's all over the internet today, so you need to check it out.
All right.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much, Dave.
All right. Thank you.